Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the list. The year-end list everyone looks forward to probably the most, maybe, depending on how much you love hearing somebody talk shit on a record. The best albums of the year list. Now like last year, I'm doing a top 20 because I like breaking down more albums that I love than albums that I hate. And I just like to talk in a bigger scale about the best of a thing. This year was incredible for good music from so many different aspects. You'll see a lot of different things on this list. And like any other list, this list is my opinion. If you agree with it, awesome. If you don't, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But since we have a lot to talk about, let's just dive in. One of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot with some of the albums on this list is that there were artists this year that took an idea that they planted seeds for on a previous release and flourished it into something more. When American football took some of these sad dad ideals seen on their debut and funneled them into a more dreamlike, serene experience that still retained a lot of the tightness seen on their debut and on their return, but they gave their sounds more air. They gave them a cold feeling that really felt like it coated the winter atmosphere that they dropped this album in. It's sad boy tunes at their saddiest, but they don't lose a sense of melody and catchiness within that. Some of the vocalists they brought in really suit their sound, and I think that this was a great expansion on not only their core sound, but what they came back with a couple years ago. A fantastic release that I wish more people sang its praise of personally.
Game, but we get paid to like Jamil was raised upon a hill.
Like I said in my review and my concert breakdown, I'm late on the Rapsody train. This is the first album I've really given a spin of this artist, but it is a powerful concept album that not only expands upon a lot of ideas explored within the general zeitgeist of this particular scene over the last couple of years. I'm all for people singing praises of excellence within their culture, and I think Rapsody not only did that by having kind of the same ideals seen on but in a more upfront way, but she also injected a lot of her own growth and personal success into that, which I think was important, and I think that she made one of the strongest statements of the year because of it. When I saw her live, she was all about embodiment, or self-empowerment, embodiment, motivation, and in a year and a decade where it felt like we were so drowned in our own misery, I loved that Rapsody seemingly said fuck that and made a celebration of not only her success, but black excellence in general. Black female excellence in general on top of that. Great album, very tightly constructed instrumentals and verses on all fronts, and it is a dope-ass listen. You know when I was saying shit about Lil Dicky's Earth? It's because King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard were also on their environmental tip on both of their records this year, and I just seemingly am shocked still. I am gobsmacked that this Australian rock band churned out one of the best metal albums of the year, and it is a throwback to vintage thrash, a sound that I am all about. I love how gritty, how sludgy this thing gets, how truly lo-fi it sounds. It's like the Voivod record I've wanted from Voivod for a little while now. Granted, I didn't listen to The Wake last year. I heard that was an amazing record, but the production on this is so indebted to vintage thrash. I love every ounce of what this band churned out. And while I'm sure they're never going to explore this sound again, I'm glad that we at least got a glimpse of an alternate universe where it could be their new sound. Now, I know a lot of other people were singing this praise of this album a lot higher than I was. This isn't my new favorite Tyler, the Creator album, but I like that he took the ideas seen and explored on Flower Boy and grew them into a much more bittersweet, almost cathartic experience. You know, there's a lot of forlorn ideas heard in the emotional delivery that Tyler has in some of the hits on here. He still spins a lot of hooks into a lot of these songs, even though it's not rap-centric when he raps, he still spits some good bars. I love the more lean on R&B infused sounds, and I think that it works really well in Tyler's favor. His voice really suits this sound, and I love the ideas he toys with, and I honestly wouldn't mind to see him go further in this direction.
Came from the store where hot dogs got boiled right up in the...
Like I said in my review, one of my favorite song off of Atrocity Exhibition aren't any of the songs where he's diving so deep into his excess that are really a part of the album. It's the moment of brevity that he gives you from the madness, Tell Me What I Don't Know, where he just spits the calmest I've ever heard him about some of his struggles in his early life. And I love that he took that idea and made an entire album out of it, evolving from the party guy into the cool, reflective uncle. I am proud of Danny Brown for making this transition. I know sometimes it's really hard to get out of the excess, and while I don't mind that it's a little more subdued than his party albums, I also really love the production on this thing. It's really smooth and it's fitting, and there's still moments on here where he has a good time and he really amps it up. And I appreciate that even when he's seemingly sobering up, he hasn't lost his sense of fun. And this record is almost like a full personality. While I don't think Danny Brown was one note on any of his earlier records whatsoever, I feel like a lot of the appeal of Danny Brown is that he was this zany, nutso guy that you weren't knowing what he was going to do next. And I like that on You Know What I'm Saying. He still has his moments of excitement, but he is keeping it a lot more real in the truest sense. This is Danny Brown's veteran flex, and I'm perfectly okay with that. The guy's almost 40. I'm not upset that he's aging like this, as opposed to some other rappers who still make music in their 40s that sound like they're trying to recapture their youth a little too hard. Danny Brown is aging like fine fucking wine, in my opinion. This is a great year for jazz. Great year for space jazz, especially, which you'll hear me talk about again. But The Comet is Coming's In the Lifetime of the Deep Mystery is an album of scope. It's an album of scale. They really let you feel the depth of space amongst the droning sounds and tight grooves that are laden around this thing. This thing is unrelentingly huge, and it is unrelentingly bleak in some of its sounds. Some of the drones on here are very foreboding and really get almost existential sounding. This album is all about space and aesthetic and vibe, but in the richest way possible. The production on this thing is so very good, and I love how tight this band shifts their dynamics across this entire release. It is an incredible listen, and again, one of the best jazz albums I've heard all year. Continuing on that train, Flying Lotus kicks a lot of ass. Seemingly this record swept under everyone's radar, but I adore Flamagra. I like that he doubles down on a lot of the aesthetics he's known to have, seen on Cosmogramma, but with a less leaning on IDM and more of a leaning on lo-fi beats. This is cut the bullshit Flying Lotus, who's not afraid to get weird still with songs featuring David Lynch and members of Funkadelic. This album is so dope. He's got all of the dazzle of a high-budget project with a lot of features, but he uses it to great effect. You know, whereas artists like Ed Sheeran were trying the same thing and failing, this felt so awesome to revisit every time I did. I had a hard time picking a favorite song to put it on my list. I love Black Balloons Reprise, but I also love the track with Anderson .Paak. I love the Mac Miller tribute. I love a lot of this record. It is so very good, and I wish, again, more people were into it like I was. The actual best jazz album I listened to this year, DeLorean's debut, Lorians, featured a little bit more of a twist on jazz. They infused some Canterbury scene influence on here in a way that fit the aesthetic they were going for. I love a lot of the grooves on here more than on The Comet is Coming's latest. I love a lot of the melodies that they're toying with. They feel a little more off-kilter and fitting more of a vintage space vibe, which is a space vibe I am all into. I love the idea of using space as this metaphor for the true unknown, for bleakness, but I also like when they get really weird, cheesy, and loungy, because I'm a sucker for a good lounge album. That's why I like the last Arctic Monkeys record. And this is a lot of those vibes ramped up to 11 with a lot of the lunacy scene and some of the instrumental choices and hook ideas. I love also how bare some of it sounds still at points. A Ship of Mental Health has some really cool use of samples that pop up in other points of the record but come to an apex there. This is a record that I love showing to people if they want to get a little bit more of a taste of, I don't know, an aesthetic that I love to embrace musically. Such a fun record, and one that I've actually been revisiting a lot lately because it just feels fitting this time of year.
10,000 dead in the end.
Crash did something magical when he reviewed Moron Police. He gave the world a true gem. Like you'll see in my top 50 breakdown, this isn't the only album of this ilk, but it's the best album of its ilk to come out this year. It's absurd, it's fun, it's goofy, and again, in a year where it felt like we were trying to move past a lot of the trends seen in the decade, Moron Police did it in the best way possible, with wacky ideas, wacky song concepts that tied really well together. It is a step above your average goofy comedy rock album and is something much more important. I love this thing so very much, and I love that it still has something it wants to say amongst its absurd ideas.
This is how it feels to be in love.
This album is just beautiful. I know a lot of people are kind of praising this thing all across the board for the most part, but I feel like it's justified. Weyes Blood's Titanic Rising is beautiful. It's in a very traditional way. You know, I love the old school production. I love a lot of the old school instrumentation. I love when she throws in ideas like synthesizers, but they still sound so indebted to their era that she's trying to tap into. I think she taps into this era perfectly in the most beautifully somber of ways. I think this record is a true masterpiece and one that I'm glad we ended the decade on, because I feel like we kind of needed an album like this to close things out. She did it in harmonious splendor. My introduction to Shoo Shoo, outside of the Twin Peaks stuff, came out this year with Girl with a Basket of Fruit, and it is as off-kilter and absurd as I would have expected from a group that covered the Twin Peaks soundtrack. This thing is erratic, it is noisy, it is harsh, it is dissonant, it's almost absurd at points, and I love it for that. While it's an album that, I'll be honest, I revisit in sparse doses, whenever I do, I just love how weird it is. Where people, in a year where people were praising 1000 Gex for being absurd, this is the type of absurdity that I more dig into. I think it's great for how bizarre it is, and how poetic it tries to be, and how just dark it gets at points. This album is truly a fucking masterclass in this type of style of music. Honestly, I was just happy to hear more noise from Blanck Mass. I love the grooves on this thing. I love the, again, foreboding tone that sets forth a lot of this record. And I love how dense this fucking record sounds. I love how beefy a lot of the low end feels. And the grooves that he injects into this fit so very well. A lot of the reasons I like World Eater are on here, and the only reason why it's not higher is because this was an amazing year for music. So great. If you slept on it and you want a good, harsh, experimental electronic record, listen to Blanck Mass Animated Violence Mild. It is well worth your time. And if you liked World Eater and you missed it, get to it. It's so good. One of the most textured albums I've heard in a long time. I love that Sunn came together with Steve Albini and made the truest ambient drone guitar experience of their career. You know, while I like Monoliths and Dimensions and some of their other pieces of their catalog, I think that the amount of detail and nuance to a lot of the guitar tones and transitions across these pieces is beautiful. This album is a patience tester in all of the right ways. It is grand in scope, it is colossal. You feel how monolithic their guitars really sound, because everything wraps around you in this blanket of noise and comfort in the purest way possible. This album is warm. A lot of the fuzzy low end, because it's recorded in analog, works so well for Sunn sound. And while I didn't listen to Pyroclasts, I could not escape Life Metal's grasp, and I'm glad that it's as good as I was hoping it would be when I was hyped for it at the beginning of the year. A meeting of the minds that I think worked so very well. Cloud Rat's dense, grindcore-infused aggression fits so snugly against the World as a Vampire's gritty, sludgy form of aggression, and created this dichotomous experience that was equal parts angry and harsh and really abrasive in all of the best ways. The only reason, again, why this isn't higher is because this was a great year for music. also because Cloud Rat did it just as well on their own. Spoilers for later in the list. A split album that could have easily faltered because it's sometimes hard to make two band sounds fit so cohesively together, but these two bands just knew how to sell it. They knew what to add and what not to add to make the whole experience cohesive.
Drink it up.
Clipping took all of their ideas they sprout forth this decade and created an incredibly tight listening experience out of it. I love the addition of horror elements that don't necessarily make it a traditional horrorcore album. I love that they injected a lot of the ideas seen on, say, Splinter and Misery and tied it really well together with the ideas seen on their debut record and their first on Sub Pop. This is an anthology horror album. Every song has a detailed, nuanced, well-written horror story at its core, but it has a myriad of instrumentals that tie really well into it as well. This album is gruesome. This album is very well performed across all fronts, and it is incredibly hard to sit through at some points because of how dense and aggressive it gets. But that's Clipping for you, and that's what they do, and that's what I go to them for, and that's why it's in my top 10 albums of the year. I've been singing TWRP's praises now for 5 years, and they just keep getting better and better. I don't know how many times I need to tell you guys to listen to TWRP, but you need to listen to TWRP. Because not only does this album stand above Together Through Time because it is a tighter listening experience, TWRP do it all on their own this time around. And they showcase why they're one of the tightest bands working right now. And not only funk, but rock. A lot of the instrumentation on here is so well put together. A lot of the guitars ring in that cheesy way. The bass is so fat and meaty and it pops in the best way. The synth work on here is magnificent. The drums, super tight, super fucking funky. I love Return to Wherever, and if you're sleeping on it, if you're still sleeping on TWRP, I don't know what else to tell you, because this is hands down one of the best records I've heard all fucking year. Only reason why it's not higher is because I want so much more out of this. Black Midi showcased that they're one of the forces to keep an eye on in the coming years because they have constructed one of the best debut rock albums I've heard in a while, featuring lots of aggressive tunes over a lot of different types of ideas, whether they be odd character vignettes, odd math rock offshoots, and a lot of weird ideas thrown at the mix. They captured their live energy on a record so very well, and this album could have easily faltered if that weren't true. But they are a very talented batch of musicians that came together and replicated their stage setting on record in the best way possible. Listen to Schlagenheim. It's such a good record. A lot of people are singing its praises, but it's justified. Like I said, Cloud Rat did what they did on the split, but by themselves. Pollinator is just as dense, just as aggressive, just as cacophonous, just as muggy as that split, but it's just Cloud Rat. It is one of the most intense listening experiences I had all year. I love how grimy and gritty this thing is. It's like eating a bowl of nails for breakfast without any milk, but it's a grindcore record. It's fucking intense, and I love it. I don't sing metal's praises much anymore. I know I've kind of offshooted pretty quickly from being strictly a metal channel, but when metal music still gets it, I still love it. And Cloud Rat continues to embody a lot of what I love about really heavy, extreme heavy music in the purest sense. Listen to Pollinator. It's so very, very worth it if you like heavy, aggressive, dense, extreme music. Otoboke Beaver's Itekoma Hits is a decade's worth of build-up with a beautiful payoff. This is the Avengers Endgame of punk albums. It features all of the energy and cacophony seen in their style. It has all of these songs that aren't seemingly written at the same time, melding so well together across this album that features so many good gang vocals, great switch-ups at a dime. These girls are fucking talented as shit. And they write some songs that are not only socially conscious, but poignant as well. And I love when they get a little goofy. They're not afraid to have fun. It's a punk album. You're supposed to have fun. Yes, they get aggressive. Yes, it's intense. But man, is it also really fun. What I loved about Idol's last record, I also love about Itekoma Hits, but even more so because it is so fucking crazy. These girls are nuts, but they're having a great time, and they're making a great record in the process. You guys could have probably guessed this was going to be here because I spoke so earnestly and honestly about this record, even though it was one I was in love with. I was enamored with a lot of the sounds on it. You guys know I love harsh industrial sounds. You guys probably could tell if I like albums like jazz. I'm a big fan of classical music. I love, you know, big lush production, and I love that Kristen Hayter uses music in a very cathartic, therapeutic way. I love the sounds on here. I love that she pairs these lush classical tracks with this harshness, whether in her voice or with the mechanics she's throwing at the you know, page. I think there's a level of nuance and personal feeling to these lyrics. She sits you right in the middle of her internal conflict that she's dealing with this relationship, and you can't help but feel her pain in the purest way, and I can't help but respect how raw this album feels, how emotionally potent it feels, and I feel for Kristen Hayter. You know, while this year in particular may have been a nice one for me and my things that I've done in my life, I've had rough years. I've had years where I feel like the scum on someone's shoe, and I've, you know, tried so hard to break of that, and I understand where, may not maybe to the intensity that Kristen Hayter is feeling, but I empathize and I feel for her, and I could not help but make this my album of the year because of how much it just hit me at my core. You know, when I talk about music making me feel transported to either another era in my life or something very personal, this is that in its most potent, rawest form, and that's why it's my album of 2019. That was my list. What did you think about it? If you would like to see my top 50 albums of the year in a written article on Rate Your Music, it's linked in the description. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for another year of support for my channel. I'm flabbergasted. I'm excited to move into a new decade with you all. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you'd like to join their ranks, link in the description of my Patreon. What are some of your favorite albums that came out this year? Did I not talk about an album that you love? Was it not even on my top 50? Let me know in those comments down below. I've been Vowel Rack. You guys have good days, lots of situations, and I'll see you another day.